Ada niya kete pia kwa pia makara chauvinism no chauvinism ta to chauvinism ne khode khobo bele mo no.
If you heard the word chauvinist today, you probably either think of a quaint term for a man who looks down on a woman as inferior, or of someone who is blindly and excessively patriotic.
Ako ne da dala chauvinism na ke wana huwa ne khama la de ba le la mo ne do na la ko la mes ko ni ne khama pa po khara la khama de na te da la chomo chi yo pa mu po sa ya ne nu ya wa khama da ga ni ma ne dala chauvinism ne pa na chomo ya da la pa da ga le e la ka lu mo no e ka lu do so la te ka cha ka lu la te pa la ga ya ma ne ga du ne bla kho ne dala chauvinism ne ke da wa la patriotic ne ke wa da la pa du pa ko yi la ma khama ne.
The second meaning is the older, so let's start there. The word is in fact an eponym, meaning it comes from a person's name.
Ako ne ta ka to wa ne awa khama ne eponym ma no eponym na khama ne wa da la pa da ga mi ma no wa da ma ta la chauvinism ne kha te wa da la pa da mi.
In this case, the possibly legendary Nicolas Chauvin sold.
Ako ne ke wa sa ra kha ti da la ta ka to chauvinism ne wa da la pa se pho da ga mi wa da la Nicolas Chauvin ma no ke wa da fresh ta ma no te pho lo pu kwi ma ta di ta ya la pu kwi ne.
Who supposedly served in the French army under Napoleon. There isn't any evidence.
Awa ne ke wa da fresh wa da ke wa through ma ke wa da fresh ta bo da awa ne na ko na wa pe Napoleon cha da chok ta ma wa ba ke wa da khama la awa ke wa through na ta wa da na ko di da wa te wa da a mi ya ne ma ba sa na ke ne le ta ke ta klo la ti la sha ri ne kwa de ti ne wa ma la pa da ga ne a ke wa da fresh ta ke wa da wa la Napoleon ta pe Napoleon pa da chok ta ma na ga da wa evident ta wa ta ro ba ma no khama ne na ke ne le ki ne te mi de myo ne kho ba lo wa kwe wa te ke klo ne le ki ne ke ra wa le ta mi ta pla ma no.
Evidence that he actually existed, but nevertheless he became famous as a figure of blind patriotism and fervor for Napoleon, long after the emperor's ousting, and thus a figure of ridicule. The word in French goes back to the 1830s and makes its way into England.
Ako ne ta to wa ne chovin ne ne sa ra le to kho ya ta chi ma wa ne le ki la tu da wa le ko lo wa o ma no.
At least as early as the 1860s.
Da wa ne tu le to kho ya khu si ma ne ma ta to le chovin ni se chovin ne wa ne sa da le fresh ulan he la da wa le ko lo wa klo le tu le ko lo wa la ko da chauvinist ma chauvinist ne wa ne ke le to kho ya khu si ne.
The end of the 19th century, the term broadened to refer not only to excessive patriotism, but also to other forms of excessive loyalty.
Ako ne da to wa ne le ki ne ara la ne de mi tse so wa la pa du pa kho ra ko ma wa te ma la pa du pa kho ra wa la sa e ka lu ra ma no de ki na le ke da si ko wa ta kha le ke pa ga le to lu ma da to lu da ka lu to lu da ti ko ya ba no ke wa le ki la ne ke ya da le ko da superior of one o ko ma la cha da wa ne do so do ko ma da wa ko ma ne a po sa le ya ne ma da la to chop ni se le ki na ko ma ne a ko ma ne de cha ne cha da le da ya ne ma no.
Or belief in the superiority of one's own kind. It was then picked up in Communist Party circles in phrases such as race chauvinism and white chauvinism.
Adola chora da ya da lo le ki la ne da to wa ne le ki la ne ko la ba ba ka la community de pa ne ki ni wa da to de play lo da ko ma de wo da wa da le ko ma da le racism ma ka le ta kwa de lo la da de ba ne he o ro ko ma da to de play ni la da to de play ya da le te le kha ti ko bo ko ne na ko ne mo li mo pa ne da le ma ne to a kwa la ka cha na ko da le ma do wa da ke o la pa mi pa da ka na mi de ro ta hi ni ya ro ta ma tho ro ta te yo yo de cho la ka ne tu da le tu da le ba da sa ya ka lu ba du ba ko he wa de cho la ka ne ko ma ta cho kho tu da le Russia mo no Russia ya da le America ne me su da to le cho Venice ne le ki ne ke da le ko ma kwa de lo ba do ba chi kwa de lo ka lu le ga de pa ne tu da le America le United States mo no.
Particular to counter racism in the United States. And following the model of those phrases, women in the Communist Party seem to have coined the term male chauvinism in the 1930s.
Ako ne do ta to wa ne pa ra ki ne ya da le America ne ne ti ko le America la cho da le wa tu phi wa phi ne kwa de lo da mu lo ne lo pa mu do pa kwa ne ta che to tu to ro wa ko ne cho ko ma ne ya da le chauvinist ya da le what chauvinist ya ne ka ma no wa phi wa de pa ne cho mo do la da ka lu do do la ka ma wa phi wa na ke de ba de ma ta to bla na wa cha ka ma le cha de le da tu wa ma le ki ya ka ko le female wala chauvinism ko ma common ta de pa ne he pot thora ki chot chom ta ko ta lo de ba ko la racism ma na ni
For a brief vogue, the term mostly disappeared from view, that is, until the feminist movements in the 60s and 70s.
ma ta to wa le ki la ne ma ko la ta ge lo wala la chora lo pa mu de ba ge lo ta ko ta ya le ta to ya bre to be to ku ya le to ku ya ku si le to ku ya ni si ne ta to chauvinism le ki ne sa lo ma ma da la american
The children of former Communist Party members apparently revived the word, and from 1968 it took off again. However, the term didn't seem to have much staying power.
အခုနေတာတော့6 နဲ့လက်မကနေတဆာရသူ့တော့ဘယ်တော့ကွာဖဲလေတော့ခုရခုစီခွေခွေခွာနေတဆာရသူ့နေဘာစနာကနေတဲလေတက်တော့6နဲ့လောကောနဲ့ကဲဝလဲလဲတက်ကောလာမှာလောကြကလို့နေကွာလာဝဲတဝရဝရပလက်ကိုခွာမှာနေကောလမင်း6ခမပေါ့ခွာနေတို့ဆိုရတော့အမေရိကန်ကပေါ့မနေတက်ခွဲရရတော့ဘာလဲဘဝနဲ့ပေါ့မနေဘာကလည်းတချီပါမဲပါမတန်တော့မျိုးမှာကွာ6ရလားkama da la po khwane do so pa mu ne do so ba ka ta so ta ka ma de pa ne wasana ke ne ta sa ro ge te wasana le ki ne lo lo ke ke ne ba ta to chop ni se ne le america ne a lo to lo cho do lo ma kama ne le a de ke ba ta to le a ta popular cha ta la pu gui la ba ma no
Power and began to decline in frequency from the late 1970s. The phrase had been further expanded to male chauvinist pig, perhaps initially to soften its effect through humor, though this was soon picked up by mainstream media to mock feminists. In fact, the earliest citation of that full phrase in the Oxford English Dictionary is in Playboy magazine, so perhaps it's not surprising that the term fell out of favor. Before the word chauvinism arose, the word misogyny could be used to refer to hatred of women. Greek misogynia and misogynes used originally in reference to a disease or to a comic trope of a grumpy old man who hates his
အခုမှတကယ်6အိုဒီပါနဲ့တက်တော့တကယ်6နှုတ်လာပါခါနဲ့တက်တော့လဲ mess ကိုနေနေဝဲနှုတ်လာတော့ miss ကိုနေဝခါလဲတာကွာတလောလောတာလောချတာလဲပေါ်မှုတော့ပေါ်ခွာမှာတော့ခမကလဲတသူရတာဟေကျတော့ပေါ်ခွာနေတာဟေဝရမှာပုံစံရမှာခမတက်တော့နာကနေလက်ခိနေပဲလေတက်တော့6လက်ခိနေဝဲ replace နေကောတယ်လေတက်တော့6ဝဲနေawe ma pue ko ra khama wa nu la pue ko ra mascot ni awe attack to wa ma na
wife are composed of the elements misos, hatred, and gyne, woman, distantly related to the English word queen. Misogyny and misogynist make it into English in the 17th century and develop an extended meaning of prejudice against women in the 20th century. But as we'll soon see, starting much earlier, Greek misogyny played a significant role in the development of Western misogyny. But first, we have to finish looking at the word chauvinism and related terms.
အခုနေခမနဲ့တက်တော့နေဝတက်ပြဝခတ်ဒီခဘောလတကယ်chauvinismတက်ဆိုကနေနာကနေခက်ခါနေဝတက်ဘခါလာchauvinism ခါလမတက်တော့ play ဝကတက်အတက်ခိုင်
It was around the time that the term male chauvinism came into vogue, specifically 1970, when the word patriarchy started to be used by feminists to mean a society dominated by men at the expense of women. The word actually goes back to Greek, coming from pater, father, and archein, to rule, and was used in various...
ခမနဲ့တက်တော့တဲ့ဖာနေဟဲခမရတော့ Patrick နေတက်တော့နခ Peter Akin နေဝနေ father rule ခမနဲ့ဟိဘောခမနဲ့တလပမွန်းနေဘောတဲ့ဖာနေဘမမလောကေကလနာကေလပခွာနေတော့ဆိုလာမပခွာရောနော်တက်ခွတက်ရလာပုကွနေတော့ဆိုခမနဲ့တက်ခွရတဲ့ဒီသောပါမအခုနေဘကလည်း target ခါနေမထွတ်တော်တော့ဘာကညာလူလာနေလာချောတ်ကျဝဲဘာကညာနဲ့လူလာနေတိတော့ကလူကလူလာတော့ပါအောင်ကလည်းဝဲဘာညာလူလာနေအတကေပေါ်မှုနေမတဲ့လေဘမတဲလာပေါ်မှုနေမတဲ့တို့ဆိုပါစနေပေါ်မှုနေလေးဖို့ခေါ်ပုံနေကဲပါလဲအတို့ဆိုမှလောဘာညာလူလာထူတူက culture နေပါတော့နာကလူကနေရတယ်တမင်းပါကလူကနေပေါ်မှုနေဝဲလေးဖို့ခေါ်ဘောတဲ့တို့ဆိုပါလဲလက်တတူပလောက်ဘောတဲ့တို့ဆိုပါမခမနေကလူကတဲ့တဖာနေလဲပုတ်ပွနေပေါ်မှုနေခမတာတခိဝတက်ခွတဲ့ရပါမခမနေဟေဝတို့ရတော့လဲတော့ခမတာလဲ Christian မချတာလဲဘာခရစ်ဖို့တဲ့တဖာနေအဲ့ဒါလဲပေါ်မှုနေလဲပုတ်ပွနေကေဝတာဖို့တရတနေပါဘာလဲကေတာဖို့တရနေဒါတော့ပေါ်ဖာလာဘောလ bishop ကြတော့ခါတူရနေဘာလဲကေတော့ခါတူနေထဲရလဲတော့ခါတူနေမှာ bishop မကမလဲပါရနေမနော်ဝဲပြရလဲပါလောချတာလဲတာဖို့တရဒီတော့တာဖို့တရနေမှာမနော်ဟိုနေကေသေတာထဲလဲပေါ်ခွာလာပေါ်မှုတဲ့ကေတဲ့ပါဟိုနေ call father to rule ဟိုနေဘက်ကလဲ culture တဲ့ဖာနေလောချောလာတာပါကညဖတ်တော့ညမဒါလဲတက်တူတဲ့ပါမြေကွာလဲပါကည culture လဲပါကညလူလာထုတနုနေပြမမှာလောရနေကျတော့လောချတာပါကညလူလာထုတနု me kwala khoti kho boya da ba khe ne ta le ba khe bo ne pa mu ne do so la ba nya lu la ne kho ma ne khe ne ne me o khe ne ne phi me da awa ne ne phu ga the ba ma ne phi wa me wi ma ne phu ga the la a do he la da le mo pa do me o khe ne mo me wi ma ne pa the la ne mo me ru ga pa de the ba ma no awa ne pa me wi ma da lo ga cha cha ma kho ne ta lu ta la ta se ta la ne a di so ba ka lo pa mu nu pho a ta lu ta la de me the wa mu nu pho wa isha ne ko blu pe ya ma kho ma de me thot tro la ba nya lu la ka lo ta khwet ta ya di de ku ne ko father to ru ne ba me kwa ne ba ga nya na lu la na la chwa ne ku lu ga ho ne ma no ba ka ta ge khai ne ho ne wa da lo chwa da de ba mu nu pho ma no
Various Christian senses, such as referring to certain bishops in the early church, with patriarchy first appearing in English in a 1561 translation of a text by Protestant reformer John Calvin, after whom the Calvinist church is named. John Calvin, or Jean Calvin, as he is known in his native French, is tied into this story in another way, as the name Calvin is the northern French equivalent of the name Chauvin.
အခုနေတော့ဘာကဝတဲတက်တော့ကျလconvince နေဝကျန် convince မနော်ဝကျန် convince နေဝဒအကဲပါရကလာကွယ်ဝလီလေဒီဖိုင်တော့အဝနာကနေအမီနေဝကဲလာတာတော့တက်တော့ chauvin ပြရမနော်ခမနေအဝနေတာလေ convince နေဝနေလေလာတေကလောနေဘောနေခမတော့ဘာခုလီဒီဖိုင်နေခမအပိုးစားရမနော်နကနေ chauvin ကနေဘောနေလာခမနေတက်တော့ခိပလဲနေဝအဝအကဝတကတကလောပဲနေခမနေဒီတော့တော်လာမနော်အဝနေမဘောနေမလေ fresh ကလောနေကောလေ chauvin မနော်အခုနေပါတဲ့ဘာခေါနေလာခလိခိနာကchauvin Calvi or come on a tag to the bus set. When Bacale Chauvin is a tag to plumber, I got we cut the carbon and not there.
From which we get the word chauvinism. It should be further noted that the name Chauvin is derived from the French word chauve, meaning bald. From
a commune tag to come a ball, tell I'm going to ball in the level, a do a go, a Buddha, a ball away from my. I went awara teora kamane le aro teora le French the Latin kamane tak to kibla ne me lo me di to na kana khamya di to man
Latin Calvus. So I suppose you could say that this etymology, along with the paternalistic fatherly patriarchy, at least coincidentally, highlights the fact that we have old men to blame for sexual discrimination.
ko ne ko le ta pa ne sa da le pa mu de pa ne sa tu wa le teora pa khwa de pa ne ke chauvinism ya kamaneပါတဲ့ဖိုင်နဲ့တပါလူပါပွေဝဲတော့ပေါ်မှုပါဝင်ဘက်ကလည်း west ဝမှုနုဝတဲ့ဖိုင်နဲ့ဝင်နေအမှုနုတဲ့ဖိုင်နဲ့လာပုကွနေမှာလောကနာကိနေတဲ့ပါတော့ပေါ်မှုမှာပေါ်မှုနဲ့အော်လေဟီနာလန်တလာတာတဲ့ဖိုင်နဲ့ပတ်ဒလာအမေရိကဒါလည်းမနေဟဲကြော်ရတာတဲ့ဘယ်နေဝလာခိဒါနေပေါ်မှုတဲ့ဖိုင်နဲ့ရတဲ့တမ်ကွာတဲ့မနေဝတာခွတ်တဲ့ရလဲကဲကဲနာပါတော်နေဝတာခွတ်တဲ့ရလဲခိမဲပါခါတဲ့ဖိုင်တော့တူမှာ
And it was this coincidental connection between Calvin and chauvinism that inspired me to look at the religious roots of misogyny and the ties between chauvinism and other types of discrimination. It turns out the confluence of the Christian tradition and Greek philosophy created a toxic environment for women in Western society for 2,000 years. Of course, the West doesn't hold the monopoly on misogyny, which can be found in many cultures around the world, and all available evidence suggests that misogyny is the oldest human prejudice. But since we're looking at English vocabulary, we'll have to stick with Western culture. And to do that, we'll have to first turn to the Jewish tradition, which would later become the foundation of Christianity.
အခုနေတော့ချော်ဗင်းစီတဲ့ဖိုင်နဲ့ဝဟဘလာတာဘာကလည်းတပုတဘာတက်ပြဘာကလည်းခဝတပုတဘာမျိုးကြီးတခါတော့လက်ကိလနဲ့ဟဲတာပေါ်ထွဲတယ်လဲတဲရလဲတော့ကွာဘာခတ်ဒီခဘိုးနဲ့ကွာဘာခါလဲချော်တယ်လဲပွာဣစရေတာဘာမနော်ဟိုနေခမတလဝဣစရေတာဘာနဲ့လည်းဝခရိဖိုးနေတာဘာခတ်တီနဲ့ခေါ်တယ်လဲဝဣစရေလာတော့ဝကဲတော့ကွာဝဣစရေတာဘာတဲ့ပါခတ်ဒီခဘိုးဖဲလဲခရစ်ဝရဝခရိဝတာပုတဘာနုလာဝရခတ်ဒီခဘိုးမနော်
That early Jewish society was patriarchal is not particularly surprising in the context of the ancient world. What is notable is that they had a monotheistic religion with a fall of man creation myth. In the book of Genesis, Adam was created by God in his image and placed in paradise, the Garden of Eden. Eve was more of an afterthought made from Adam's rib. Now, of course, different churches which share this story, which is found in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, interpret the culpability of Adam and Eve in their expulsion from Eden differently. But as the story in Genesis goes, Eve gave in to the temptations of the serpent and ate the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then shared that fruit with Adam. And following this, they both became ashamed of their...
ta sa da kholo ta kwat lo da khama ne lo pok khane do solo pong pong ko ne e do te wada le awa hi ni wada le background ya da le wa tu wada ne ta to de ba ke ta le ko ta to ne awa asa da ke le ta bu ta ba ta to lo ne wa ke ba ke tu ya le thi ru ko te me ge le ka lu ge wo me ge da le ta khwe ta ya ne le le la အခုနေဝတ်တက်ပြတို့ရတာလေတော်လေလီဆော့စီဘူးနေကကြာရနေတေးလောပေါက်ခွာချိုးဝိမတေးလောပေါ်မှုနေကမနေဘာတေးလောဝဟိနေကတော့ပေါ်မှုတော့လေကီလောတက်ပြဝကမလာတန်လီပစောကမရတေဝရလေမှုကလီနေလီပစောဝရစောအဒိုင်လောနေတော့ကမန်ဟက်ပလီစောဝနော်ယူလောနော်ယူအဝကမန်နော်ယူတော့ဝတာဝရအပတာတေဝကမတာတိဖာနော်အမောတေဝရယနေလေကီလောတော့ဝခေဝတေဖာရောအဘဝရကမနေ Come on, that lips on it all, but tell that lips on a man, the new lot of over that. A put out a lot of licky lot of get over and nickness, come on, get out what that about purpose anymore. That kind of wet tip ya or tip ya, what I talk to the chovin is your blenny. Mamcola, the blood clock come your only arcade come on, come to talk to chovin is an arcade talk to low west ribbon, power that quite a law upon moon. Come over that call up the law upon moon of what ever that. I could chat out when it do so, young man.
Their nakedness. Thus, many have held Eve doubly responsible, or at least more responsible than Adam. In addition to their expulsion from paradise, they are made to live mortal lives, and Adam must work for the necessities of life, in other words, engage in agriculture. And Eve, and all women who follow her, are given the extra punishments of being subservient to their husbands and suffering the pains of childbirth. So, this story both justifies a patriarchal society with a lower status for women, but also figures women in terms of their role in sexuality, remember the shame of their nakedness, and childbirth. Interestingly, the ancient Greeks also have a fall of man myth, the story of Pandora, whose name means either all-gifted or all-giving. In the story as told by Hesiod in the 6th century BC, men, and only men, had a trouble-free and happy existence, though they didn't have the secret of fire and had to eat their meat raw. The Titan Prometheus illicitly gave fire to men, and as part of the punishment for this, Zeus ordered the creation of the first human woman, Pandora, not just as an afterthought, but specifically as a punishment, and she is endowed with seductive qualities as well as a deceitful character, and she is referred to as Kalon Kakon, beautiful evil.
Now, when a bacala talk to learn what the Javakala Pandora, Kamala Krishna, and what I see to tell so like whatever color, La Puguine, what they run a me would over a lekilone. But then my ta hi lo mi u mo do ta hi lo mi u le ki cho cho ta ti lo ne wa po mu ga le po sa le ma ta ne ta ko ne to lo cho da de wa da no u so da le ko ne lo cho da de che a wa ne le gris ta ne he la ka ta ta te da wa ma ta te pu da wa pa le mi le Israel da de wa he da no u so da po sa ne mo no
Pandora has with her a sealed jar that she is not supposed to open, but overcome with curiosity, she opens it, releasing pain and evil among men, leaving only hope in the jar. This myth, and the fact that the king of the gods, Zeus, is depicted in many myths as a serial rapist, provide a backdrop to Greek society. Now, outside of Athens, there is a lack of evidence of what life was actually like for Greek women, but it's Athenian culture which became the most profoundly influential on later Western culture. Perhaps paradoxically.
What tip young one come that Tilan or Pomurga, what a catilla, Monlo, or Bakura Kodakiba, Mekuda Kodakuni, Tachuda Chake, or Wamdala, Tane Odadumo, Nakini Likin or Pomura, Arine, Pomo Pomula, Tatila, Norgane, where the Canada or where Catilla, Cola, Likla, Tachuda Chane, Catera, common head, the Laco Clara, Takaman, and Laula, Pomu, Como Cola, the Canada, Wacone. When I Ponsa ma memele wa Israel arune awen arune wa Israel arune when no you do awara cho ada e pota memele wa Greece ta arune wa kachai wa ti la no pokwa le ta wa pomu ga arune te le ta ba ora wara wa ka ti ko ba na le ora wa ka ti ko ta chu da ja ji do come on wa ideology de pa ne ta chu mo chu ma de pa ne he wa le Greece de pa ma wa na ta de di so wa na ta to ne wa le chauvinism ne ta do so ma come where Tevera le chora Tevera Kakolo Pomun Pokwana do so ne Kolo Pomun the Canada wa gone ta signo posa le ba o play la pomi ba de pomi o Tevera Panama.
Paradoxically, along with democracy, Athens in the 5th century BC developed an exceedingly misogynistic attitude. It's important to remember that that democracy was extremely limited, including only adult male citizens, and supported through a slave economy. In this society, women remained legally children, always under the guardianship of a man, They were, at least ideally, kept in a segregated part of the house and were not allowed to leave the house unaccompanied, and received little to no education. In addition to the practical reality of women's social and
အခုမှတော့တေရလဲတချုံမချုံမှာကမလာတတေရဖာနေလဲတေဝမကောလဲကပေါ်မွန်းအော်ရောလဲချရလဲခရစ်နေဝတေဘကလဲပဒရချတချသူဝရဒီမိုကရေစီကမနေကမလာပပရာတနုဝဒနာကေနေခပလပေါ်မွန်းကမနေတတိလနေပေါ်ခါလဲတဘာအော်ရောဝရကတိဖလနေခိုဘာရောအော်ရောကိုနေလဲခိနေတာဟေဝတာကမလဲပေါ်မွန်းကမလဲဟိကွာဒီကွာပေါ်လောတာတေခွဲလဲကထော့ချိုထော့ကောပါတာတေခွဲလဲကမနေတဘလခိုင်ရမောနေတာတေအခွဲပါအခုနေတာတိဖာနေတာကြောက်ခေါ်လဲထီရူကောတဲ့မနော်အဲ့တော့တေဝရခမနေဘကလည်းတက်တိုချိုဗီနီဆီယန်မြေတက်တိုချိုဗီနီဆီယန်အတကေဟဲလေကောရလေပေါ့ခွာဒိုဆိုလာပုကွန်း
superiority in Athens, Athenian philosophers developed a theoretical basis for misogyny, and the two most responsible for this are Plato and Aristotle. Somewhat paradoxically, Plato is sometimes taken as almost a proto-feminist, since in his work The Republic, he describes an ideal society in which women receive the same education as men and are among the ruling.
အဝနေဘာခိကလည်းတော့ချောတလေကတဲ့ကောလဲ play တော့အထူရောအစတိုရောအဝနေကေဝဒခမနေဝဒူဝရတော့အဲ့တော့မှချောတလေအဲ့တော့တေဝတေရခမတယ်လို့ပေါ်မှုတော့ပေါ်ခွာနေထက်တော့တူတော်လာမှာအခမတော့ပေါ်မှုနာကနေကနေမတာဆိုတာကမောပေါ်မှုနာကနေတော့ကရတော့နေမတာကိုကူတေဒီတော့ပေါ်ခွာနေအဝနေကေဝဘာခိကလည်းကဲ့တူအော်တော့အဝဒူအော်တော့ကဝဒတထက်တော့တူတော်ပါကမနေလေခမလေတတော့လေပူကွေဟာရနေတာတဲ့ဖာနေအဲ့တော့တေလဲတပပါမင်းဘာပဲစနာကင်းနေဘယ်ကရဟင်းနေလာပါချောတလေကတမဘာခိကပလက်တိုရာအစတရိုနေအဝချောတလေပလက်ချောတလေဝရတဲ့ပိုင်မနော်
an elite with the same responsibilities, and men and women only differ in their biological roles in reproduction, but this comes at the cost of the denial of their sexuality. His is a sterile imagined world in which breeding is regulated and the parent-child relationship is denied in favor of communally raised children. However, it's Plato's idea of dualism which was to cause the most harm in the long run. Plato developed the theory of forms, in which he makes a distinction between a higher reality in which exist ideal forms, of which physical existence is an imperfect reflection. Only the intellect could engage with that higher reality, and all the stuff of physical existence, including sexuality, was lesser, a falling away from perfection. This dualism, then, becomes the philosophical basis for misogyny, with men associated with the intellect and women with sexuality and the imperfect physical existence.
Come on, what Tevadaဝရချောတလေရတဲ့ဖိုင်နော်ခမရတဲရလဲပပုံပခွန်အဖလက်ရနေခပလတပတ်တီဘကိုတော့ပမှုနော်ဖလက်ရခမတတီလောလဲဘာအိုဒဒီဖိုခမကဘဒဖိုရတဲ့ဖက်လာမှာတဲရလဲပခွန်နေဝရမွန်ဒါလဲခမနေကဘာခုပြီခုမှာကဘာလူအကြီးဘောအဝ define အဝတော့တေဝခမရကြမှာလေခင်းနေတော့ငပစနာကနေတက်လာမှာဘာကွာချွမဲမှာဘာတနော်တို့တူလောပါဟိုနေကေတော့ကဝဒခမလဲအဲ့တော့တေဝဒကေတော့ဝဒကောတာခဲမThe
standard understanding of the nature of women in the ancient world, both in Greece and later in Rome, is that they are sexually rapacious as a result of their connection to the physical world. So the misogynistic response to this was rooted in fear of women and of their sexuality, hence the need to regulate and control them.
Awara အဲ့တော့တေဝရလည်းပေါ်မှုနေလေ west လောဝမှုနေဝတဲ့ကွာတလောပေါ်မှုကမနဲ့လက် plate တော်ရနေဝဲ common plate တော်အဝဲadditional နေဝဲတော့တေဝရလည်းတလတာတဲ့ဖတ်တယ်တပပါတေဝရလည်း misconception scientific term ခမောကလည်း scientific ခမော nature ဘာကိုနေနမရတဲ့တေဝရတေဝရရ
Plato's student Aristotle doubled down on this misogyny in scientific terms. He explicitly held women to be inferior to men and believed that women were mutilated, undercooked, or imperfect males. Oh, and in an odd connection to the roots of chauvinism, he believed that the lack of baldness among women was proof of their childlike, undeveloped nature. Moving forward, it's during the Roman period that Christianity grows out of the Jewish tradition, while also being heavily influenced by Greco-Roman philosophy. It's a
Hello, where Bacaleta quattro, the Pomundo, Poqua, Tower Heaven, Leta Sutana, Paco, Leta Buta, Baba, the Leva Creek Pony, La Talo, Wamuni, Atco Crona. Come on and tag to wedding. I will have 3 letters, short, with Telapuni.
The terrible irony that Christianity would become one of the systemic drivers of misogyny, given that in its early years, women played a key role in its formation and spread. Jesus' statements about women in the gospel are free from misogyny. He frequently defended women, and there were women among his followers. And women seem to have played central roles in the activities of the new religion as it grew and spread. The Apostle Paul's contributions to the nature of Christianity are perhaps only second to those of Jesus, and his attitudes toward women are somewhat contradictory. Though he states that there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ, he also doubles down on the story of Adam and Eve, saying that women should be subservient to their husbands. And from Paul, we get the notion that sexuality is sinful and that celibacy is the ideal, but that if one couldn't handle chastity, it was better to marry than to burn. So, early Christianity provided the opportunity for women to choose a life of celibacy, which at least provided women with some control over their own fertility, giving them, perhaps for the first time, institutionally sanctioned reproductive choice. By the way, the word celibacy comes from Latin caelebs, unmarried, of unknown origin, but perhaps connected to the Proto-Indo-European roots caeelo, alone.
Come on, đó cái bài mà tê bác cả là ta bút ta ba mà cả ta qua tận lò bác cả là họ tận lệ với ta thì phải cái này có cái đó tê đó là bộ quy này và bao nhiêu tiền phải này và bao khoa mê come on này giờ là cho ta là Europe này come on này và bao nhiêu tiền phải này và bao khoa mê cái đó mà bị mình là và tu lò mà come on là và mấy khi ở đó và mấy khiพอตาไม่เคยเอาไปเอวอะไรอย่างนั้นแล้วก็เล็กนี่ว่าพอมื้อนี้ว่าตอนนี้ก็ได้ก็ได้อะไรก็ได้เลย celebrity นะวันนี้ come on เนี่ยအဲ့တော့တဲတော့ပေါ်မွန်တဲ့ဘာနေမေတဲတော့ဘာတကမေတကြိုင်ဝနာကနေတလို့ဖလောတာပါတလို့အဲပါဟမနေတလို့ကေထားဝတလို့ဒကလာဝါပါပုစနေတချောတလဲနေဝချောမ
or kehilo, pole, and only in the 1950s came to refer not only to remaining unmarried, but also to voluntary abstinence from sexuality. But we'll come back to this later.
come on တဲဝတာကေတပါချောပေါ်မွန်နေလက်ခိနေပေါ်ရလဲတဲ့ဝါမေတကနေမေတကြိုင်ဝနေတလို့ဖလောတာပါနကလက်ခိနေမခါလဲကောလဲတာမီခုခုမြေဒါဖာခမပေါ်မွန်မေတူလောပါနေခမတမနေချူရတယ်အဲ့တော့တာခမနေတာလဲတမီတဲရက်တူလဲလဲနေတာလဲချောဗီနီစီယနေခမနေလာပုကွနေကြောက်တာခမလဲတတ်တို့ဆိုပါကိုလောပေါ်မွန်တာပေါ်ခါပါကိုလော
The early Christian theologian and philosopher Augustine was influenced by Neoplatonic philosophy, seeing his own struggles as a contest between the desires of the flesh and the striving of the will. And Augustine is largely responsible for the concept of original sin, that first trespass in the Garden of Eden caused human beings to fall away from perfection, and ever since, humans have carried the burden of that sin, at least until the crucifixion of Christ. Over the course of the Middle Ages, that dualistic divide would continue to be the source of misogyny, and paradoxically, it would come along with the increasing elevation of the figure of Mary, mother of Jesus. In AD 431, the Roman Church declared Mary was not only the mother of Jesus, but the mother of God. She had also been declared a perpetual virgin. If God was thought to be perfect, the mother of God couldn't be tainted by sin either. It's actually kind of a domino effect. The early churches first argued about whether Jesus was human or divine, or some combination, and Mary's status rose as a result of Jesus' elevation. She was also deemed not to have suffered death, but to have been assumed, body and soul, directly into heaven.
วันนี้ว่าเทวะขาเลยตักรู้ว่าเนี่ยตักตัวกันให้ขาเลยตั้งพุทธบาบุเลยเทปยาวัดชอสตาเลยบักขาเลยก็สักครีแล้วก็เพลเลยน้องมารีเนี่ยก็ว่าเขามาเนี่ยเทวดาปอมุเลยสอสีค่ะชั่วโมงว่าเทระครับว่ากว่าแล้วก็เตอร์จีแล้วก็เตอร์นี่เนี่ยมั่วเลยเอาไว้ได้ว่าเททอร์แล้วก็เตอร์อย่างมั่วแล้วว่าใครชั่วโมงเนี่ยเอาไว้ได้เทแล้วเทเขามาว่าเทวะขา history ทอร์เริ่มมาแล้วพูดกัน
In a less well-known, but perhaps more plausible version, bigot might be an abbreviation of albigo in reference to the Albigensian heresy, in other words, the Cathars, and the word does first appear in French at around that time in the south of France. Now we're turning to more recent words for misogyny, though as we've seen, the concepts it describes aren't new. It's in the 20th century that people have noticed them enough to need new words to label them, such as sexist and sexism. These words are surprisingly recent, at least in their modern sense of gender-based discrimination, and, like male chauvinism, had their origins in racial discrimination, again highlighting the important connection between sexism and racism, and I suppose at least retroactively demonstrating the importance of intersectional feminism.
แต่ละชอบเป็นนิสัยนะว่าเทวดาที่เนี่ยเขารู้ตาเลยว่าป้อมมันปอกขวาละมั้งปอกขวาโดโซป้อมมันโดโซว่าเอาวันเนี่ยเบสิกไว้ใจละมั้งเลยคิดเนี่ยถ้าก็เลยก็ลืมไม่เลยให้เราก็เลยก็ลืมโดโซให้เราก็เลยมันได้โดโซเอาไว้ได้ที่ผ่านเนี่ยเปิดเราก็มั้งวันเนี่ยตั้งตัวที่ผ่านเนี่ยว่าได้เลยชอบเป็นนิสัยละมั้งดอกเทวดาเนี่ยเลยเทวดาแล้วก็ที่เนี่ยละมั้งเนาะ awani chomo yite pwe la wala ar ke wate ba kha le ta gi khai wate ba kha le ko le ta kwa te lo da po mu da po kwa a ma na ko ne ro chomo ma te pe la da khai